So earlier today, or now it would actually be yesterday, but in the morning I saw where someone on Kiwi Farms had uploaded a partial transcript of the trial, and it's also now been uploaded. Later on it was uploaded. Luna put it on her Lundy Forest community page on YouTube, and it's also on her Patreon, and she referred to it as a skeleton transcript, so you can tell that it's not a complete transcript, but it gives you a general overview of what happened. So the pages are uploaded a little bit out of sequence also, so I'll put them in order when I'm looking at it. And of course we knew that there can be a lot of disappointment with things like this, and we don't have an actual verdict yet. The verdict will be September the 11th, interesting date, 9/11, but anyway, the hearing, it's very different of course than how a trial like this would be in this country. You don't have a jury, you have a panel of judges, and it looks like, if I'm understanding correctly, today is the only hearing, the only presentation of evidence or anything else. So pretty ridiculous for something this involved and that affects people's lives this greatly, but nonetheless that's how it happens. The sentencing also options, there's kind of a spectrum to them, so what they came up with was also ridiculous, but we'll see. When you see what the defense was trying to do, it's also absurd, and you'll see why. And of course many of you probably already know all of this, but just for anybody that doesn't like to read stuff like this or hasn't looked at it, or or if there's anything that's kind of been glossed over, it's kind of interesting to look at it in like this kind of a way, so that you've gone over everything that you could. And it's 13 pages, so we'll get to it here. So actually the first page is the last page. The first page that they uploaded is the end. So page 1 is actually going to be over on page 8. So let's go over to 8. Alrighty. I'm going to make that bigger. And it's going to be bottom to top because of the time. For whatever reason it goes from bottom to top. So we're at military time, so 13:03 or 1:03 in the afternoon. That's when Ilyas is led into the court in Middleburg by 2 cops. And the interpreter's there explaining to him in German how everything works. And then the president of the court has the floor, and you have the beginning of the substantive hearing. So 1:14, they have some additional documents received, and it includes a letter from the suspect addressed to the victim, and the floor is given to the prosecutor, who explains the case. The suspect is assisted by his lawyer, and it's Roland Ertz. That's how I assume you pronounce that. The court contacts the victim, Diane, 32, by telephone. Now note that it says she has decided not to come to the court in Middleburg. That wording is interesting because, as happened before, and she mentioned it on her Patreon, but she didn't put it on her major pages, so I didn't say anything, but I was dying to because I knew everybody would be outraged, and I wished people could know it. But they were not providing safety for her before, and they were going to give her this electronic option to join, and then even that got taken away at the end, which, was outrageous because it's actually against their laws. Just like in any place, a victim has a right to be present and to address her victimizers. But this time I thought they were doing the right thing, the way it sounded. It sounded like we were going to have her there, and she was going to be safe, and there was going to be the ability to even, get eyes on this and record and whatnot, and all that's not the case. They didn't make it safe for her to go. So this idea that she just decided that for no reason is, I don't like the way that's vaguely worded. She, I think, would have been there if she could have. And then, of course, on top of that, they give her a bad connection, which you'll see throughout the problems with it. So the connection is bad, contact is tried again, but it does not improve. The connection is broken, and a solution is sought. But note how they go on here. So, when we didn't have an interpreter for Ilyas, we didn't go on with things, but when we don't have a good connection for the victim, we're not going to wait 2 months to make sure she can be there. We're going to just move on with things, whether she's there or not. Nice. So, 1:20. The officer explained what the suspect is accused of. Lawyer Ertz then states he still wants to question the chief officer. And the chief officer was involved in the case since the first questioning, and he was the contact person for several people involved and could possibly say more about what a witness would like to say. Now, who this is, I'm not sure, and you'll go on to see that this is fishy here. At 1:23, one of those involved was a German woman who was to be heard as a witness. The public prosecution service was to facilitate the trip, but the witness did not travel to the Netherlands. She did send a letter in which she says she does not know who gave the order to attack Diane. In it, she points to another person. The court will briefly discuss the request from lawyer Ertz. So I don't know who that person is, but it sounds like when somebody kind of wants to spring someone on you, although she's not even going to be there, they just want to present this stuff in written form. And so I think that's a little strange. So we're going to go back to page 2, because page 2 is actually page 2 here. And we're going to go to the bottom. And we're at 1:27 in the afternoon. The court thought about the request of the lawyer of Ilyas A. for a moment, and 2 handwritten letters from the witness are now in the file, says the chairman. In addition, the public prosecutor clearly explained how the contact took place. The court is of the opinion it's not necessary to hear the chief officer. The request of lawyer Ertz is therefore rejected. Now, in terms of the witness's letters, I think that is odd, and they put them in the file. They don't say that they're going to go over them particularly, but the chief officer, I wouldn't mind hearing what the chief officer had to say for several reasons, especially involving Marina, but we'll move on from that. And by the way, note that even though this might seem a little boring or whatever, it's kind of necessary to look at it this way to know that you've looked at everything, and there are some things about Gatis and Marina in this document that people need to see that has been said, especially since I see people saying things that makes me think that they don't fully understand, that this is able to be discussed this way. It's perfectly legal to do so, and while there's some disappointing things throughout that have gone on, I think people are not noticing something. There is a point at which they indicate something about them that at least is a partially good thing. So we'll get into that. At 1:30, contact with the victim has now been restored. Oh, how nice. She gets to join again. She can listen in remotely. Now notice she's listening in. I don't know that she's able to even see what's going on. So it's like she's only partially present. It is also emphasized once again that no recordings may be made. And there's a listener there that they ask who he is and why he's there, because they're suspicious he's recording. And he's got a laptop. He doesn't speak Dutch. He says he's taking notes. They ask if he knows the victim, and he says yes. So notice how careful they are about someone who knows her, who they think might record what's actually going on. So he says he's here to write a blog, and based on a few things he can understand, he understands that no recordings may be made. The court wants to know his first and last name, which he provides. Now they're talking to the suspect, Ilyas. The facts will be discussed with him in a free, business-like manner. A limited selection of what is in the file will be mentioned. It is important to hear what his memories are and how the suspect views them. This is weird to me because, this is something you might say when you're doing like an initial questioning of someone, or like you're trying to see if something should go to trial at all, kind of thing. So you don't want to mess with someone's memories. You want them to speak off the cuff quickly and tell you what they remember so that it's not interfered with, and because they feel like that's the best way to get at truth. But this guy's been sitting around for 2 years, so this limited selection and this free business-like discussion type of attitude, it's way past time for that. First of all, he's had lots of time to come up with a bunch of lies, and we're nowhere near the time of the crime happening, and this is the time for detail. This really affects people's lives in a comprehensive way for a long time, his and hers. If somebody were an innocent accused person, they certainly would want something better than what's going on in this hearing, and in this case the victim is the one being harmed, and they deserve something a lot better, or I should say victims, better than what's occurring here. But anyway. So at 1:36, a summary is given of what happened on the 22nd of May, 2022. That's the acid attack and beating date. 12th of January and 18th of January, the 2 arson dates, one that didn't work and then the one that did. The suspect's arrested on the 18th of January, and he's in the company at that time of his stepdaughter who helped him. At some point now, at 1:37, they touch on something involving Gatis for the first time. At some point, a car was also stopped near the house in Berghamsted. The victim's ex was a passenger in that car at the time. Victim's ex. So we're talking about Gatis because the victim is Diane and he's her ex. He said that he did not want to pick up his child, who he has together with the victim. He only wanted to see his child. Now note here, he's in the car. Ilyas is recalling this conversation. So the next thing Ilyas says is clearly a lie. Okay, so we've done page 2, so page 3 on this is going to be actually at page 9 that they uploaded, so we're on page 9. 1340, 140. Suspect Ilyas A. stated he was forced to commit the acts by the victim's ex. That man, a well-known YouTuber, had already started a relationship with Ilyas A's ex. A only knew the client's name and face. He only learned that the victim was the client's ex after he'd been arrested by the police. And A is how they're referring to Abdullah, because his name is Ilyas Abdullah. So we're talking to Ilyas here, and he's saying he was forced to do this by the victim's ex. Well, we know the victim is Diane, and her ex is Gatis or Goatis, or Spheria. And that man is a well-known YouTuber who started a relationship with Ilyas A's ex. The word ex is incorrect. He's actually still married to her, but ex in the sense that they're no longer physically together. But Ilyas Abdullah's ex, but current still wife, who is that? That's Marina Abdullah, or Primal Belle. So we are talking in this court document that just happened on August the 28th. We're talking about Gatis and Marina Abdullah, or Goatis and Primal Belle. So they're talking about it, and we can talk about it. Abdullah only knew the client's name and face, and he says here he only learned the victim was her ex after he'd been arrested by the police. But guess what? He just got through saying a little while ago that in the car, Gatis, the victim's ex, was talking about a child he had with her, and that he wanted to see him and whatnot. So I think that was a lie. I think he knew that was her ex long before he had been arrested by the police. And I think some cross-examination would have made that easy to catch him in that lie. There are some points at which they ask him questions, but it's as they stated, like this very relaxed, mamby-pamby interaction that's not really about getting to much of the bottom of anything. 141. What did the YouTuber ask the suspect? The chairman of the court wants to know. In the first phone call, Abdullah says it became clear he had to solve a number of cases for him. Now that's kind of like a bad translation. Probably what was said was something more along the lines of had to commit a number of crimes or do a number of tasks, or however it would be worded, but that sounds a little strange, but that's what it means. He wanted him to do a bunch of things for him, and if he didn't do what he asked, something would be done to Abdullah's children, is what he's saying. And you'll see why that is quite questionable, and the motive was very different. 144. What exactly was asked of the suspect? Abdullah says he was given the victim's address and had to take pictures of it. He drove to the Netherlands, took pictures of her house, and he left after 1.5 hours, and a few days later he was called again, and he had to take the camera to a certain forest plot, and there he found a plastic bag. It contained a Dutch license plates and a bottle with a substance unknown to me, he says. So look at this now, what all he's doing. He's driving to another country, and then he's taking pictures, and he's spending 1.5 hours there. Days go by. He gets called again. Then he has to do this and has to do that. But he's off on his own. So if the motive for this is all of this terrible fear and duress, he certainly had lots of opportunities to get away and do something else. But we'll touch on that more in a bit. So page 4 is where we would be at, but that's actually page 3 of this. So let's go over to page 3. Let's go to the bottom. 13, 49, and 50. The man wanted me to beat the woman up badly, and I had to throw acid over her. Did she also have to die? Asks the chairman. That was not said. He did want her to experience the shame by having that acid in her face. Now, this here is disturbing because, he can say that, and we don't know whether that's true or not, but we know that he wanted her to experience more than shame of acid in her face because they were trying to get it in her eyes. So let's look at what all he did, too, besides beating her with the type of severity where you're breaking bones. You can kill somebody. He's beating her in the head. And he's pouring that and pinning her down so he can really try to get it in her eyes. You can look at the way it's running down by her nose, only because she was trying to keep it out of her eyes, that the aim was for the eyes. And also note the fact that Gatis, on some websites that I saw, some people took screenshots of him interacting with people. I think it was on Kiwi. He was saying that it was a post about a woman who had been acid attacked and blinded, and she got to counter attack and blind her victimizer, and he called it true natural revenge. So he obviously had a super interest in blindings and maimings with acid, and so yeah, their goal clearly was to kill her if they could, but if she didn't die, they wanted to make sure that her life was severely altered. Not just about like shame or having wounds or something, but really unable to function, unable to live decently. And obviously the goal though was death, because we're going back 2 more times doing things that would kill them. So I don't think they pushed back very hard here. Anyway, 153. It was his plan, says Abdullah. He told me where and when to do it. What exactly happened at the house? We arrived relatively early in the evening. It was still light outside. We walked around for a few hours. When it was dark, I didn't really know what to do. I saw some garbage containers, and I asked my stepdaughter to put one on the street. The light went on in the house. The woman came outside to put her container outside, and then I attacked her. Once again, you can note some lying, in my opinion, going on, because he's making it look like he didn't really know what to do when it got dark after walking around for a few hours. Absurd. They clearly went on trash day. You know, most places have a trash day, and you think this wasn't discussed, and that the 2 overlords overseeing this operation, Gatis and his little woman, and one are both, and you'll see later why I say that, gave him the instructions to go on trash day and to wait till she puts out the trash so that it would be dark. But they were there maybe earlier, just in case she did it earlier. Maybe they thought they could do this earlier. But nonetheless, she didn't do that, and I think Luna has described that day she was not feeling very well and was very tired, hadn't slept well or something the day before, and so she hadn't put out her trash. They roll that cart by there to lure her to do so. She hears it and thinks, oh yeah, I need to put out my trash, and goes and does it, and that's when they attack her. So they knew what they were doing. They were better planned than they're alluding to. Okay, 156. The sulfuric acid had to be thrown in the face. He threw the liquid over her, but doesn't know exactly where. Abdullah did not know exactly what was in the bottle. He says, it had to be thrown in the woman's face because the client wanted to mutilate her. On the way back, he called the client. He said that it had not gone the way he wanted, and he would report back if he wanted more from Abdullah. So they keep calling him the client here. Isn't that nice? But they give enough identifying factors that we know who they're talking about. So, and look at this. Mr. I'm so scared talks to the client, Gatis Lagstons, and since it didn't go the way he wanted, he told him he would report back if he wanted more from him. And he's just cool with this interaction with this person. Now we're at 2:02 o'clock. About what happened on May 22nd, Abdullah states his stepdaughter played a small part in the attack. She only gave the bottle to him when he asked for it. That's not what Luna states, and you can sort of see on the video some scrambling going on. So she did hold her at one point, pinned her, and was smirking when she did it, and Ilyas was laughing. But they're in such a state of terror, right? Had the stepdaughter perhaps already been instructed by Abdullah's wife, they ask, and you'll see why they ask this in a minute. I can't say that because I don't know, he says. So he says that for a reason too. Deliberately vague. So notice he doesn't give a hard no, like I know for a fact she didn't. And there's some evidence that alludes to the idea that maybe she did. So 2:06. On January 12th, Abdullah allegedly tried to set fire to the victim's home. That's right, Abdullah replies. In November, I was told by her ex that I had to take care of the fire. Now note that time frame. So in January he's doing it. He's told in November. So May is when he got done bashing her head and pouring acid, attempting to pour it in her eyes, and throwing it all over her even as she ran away. So we've got May, June, July, August, September, October, and now we're in November. And you're still interacting with this scumbag who wants you to do more, who you're so terrified of. And then you manage to do it 2 months after that. So that's a lot of time to do all kinds of other things. I said again that I didn't want to, but according to him, there were no people home at that time. A fire had to be started in the house in question. This is just him saying this. There's no evidence of that being said. And we know on January 12th they were home and he was there trying to set their house on fire. Okay, so that takes care of that page. That's page 4. So we're to page 5, and that's actually page 10 here. In the bottom. 1407. So Abdullah filled wine bottles with ethanol, but when he's at the house at night, he tries in vain to light them. One of them does burn for a while. I threw that one. My stepdaughter was there too. Now pay attention to this because he threw that one. Now, they don't really push him on where he threw it and at whom. He threw that one at the little boy's window, which, let's look at this for a minute. He was not going to exactly die of smoke inhalation, not that that would be alright either, but this was not going to be some, like, go to sleep and not know what happens to you kind of a killing. This little boy would have woken up to an explosion in his bedroom, and he would have been burning alive. And she would have as well when they were going to throw the other one into the living room. So that's a terrible way to die. We are talking about a toddler, a child under the age of 5. This is insanity. And at 2:09, the attempt to start a fire fails. The bottles don't burn. He panics because there's a lot of noise. Now notice why Mr. I love children and I'm worried about my children is panicking. Not because he's about to murder a toddler, but because there's a bunch of noise. He's about to be caught. He throws a few bottles in a front garden and runs away with his stepdaughter. 2:10. He's back in touch with the victim's ex and indicates he doesn't want to and can't, according to him. The YouTuber, Gatis gets really angry for the first time. He was clear. A fire had to be started or something else would happen. 2:12. A photo with 3 monkeys in front of the door, hear, see, and be silent. So a few days later, the suspect drives back to Luna's house. He'd been told to use petrol instead of ethanol this time. He breaks a window with a large hammer. He had to place a photo with 3 monkeys in front of the door, with hear, see, and be silent. The monkey with the closed mouth was circled, and the other 2 were crossed out. 2:14, together with his stepdaughter, he throws the petrol inside and sets it on fire. Abdullah suffers burns himself in the process. The victim's living room burns down completely. So they weren't home for that one, where they were taking greater lengths to make sure that the house burned down. But the one that they were home for, maybe God had his hand on them and protected them. And maybe also somebody helped him get burned so that he'd get caught. Who knows? The suspect says he does not know the victim or the client, Gatis either. He only knows the latter by sight. His children were threatened, and that is why he drove to the Netherlands several times to commit attacks on a woman he does not know. They're questioning that, of course, now. The chairman of the court questions this. So that takes care of page 5. So we're on page 6, and that's actually number 4. Okay, 2:19. He tells how his relationship broke down, and that his wife has a new relationship. It was a difficult time. The children were with him and her alternately, so note that the children were going between them. So you're so scared of this person that you're taking your children over there, and then you get them some of the time, and you don't, run off with them over the course of all of this time, and put them somewhere to protect them and get some help. You're a grown, huge man. I think you could probably do that. I would do that. Most people with 2 ounces of morality would do that. He heard the name of his wife's new boyfriend, the famous YouTuber, for the first time after that. If you then receive such threats and instructions, don't you go to the police straight away? They're asking him this. That is indeed not a strange thought, but I was immediately told that I was not allowed to talk to anyone about it. Otherwise, he would have found out. So once again, he's playing victim here. It makes it sound like, it's not like Ilyas has a bomb strapped to his chest and they're watching his every move, and if he gets out of line, they're going to detonate it or something. He's got lots of time where he's by himself. He's got lots of time where the children were with him, obviously alternately, so he could have taken them off somewhere and made sure they were safe, if they're all he cares about, as he indicated. So, 2:22. The victim's injuries are now being discussed. No prognosis can be given for the recovery. That fits with throwing a corrosive acid. The NFI has the liquid investigated, and that was indeed sulfuric acid. And I noticed they don't go into what the concentration of the acid was here, because that matters with regard to whether it's attempted murder or not. But they may have discussed it, but it's not in this document. A jerry can containing the petrol used in the fire was found in Abdullah's car. And then they discuss there's 2 pictures of the house fire burned completely in the living room. Abdullah is asked a few more questions about the attempted arson and the arson 6 days later. Yes, the use of ethanol was his own idea. The order was to set a fire, but not how to do it. But a few days later it was different. Then he, meaning Gatis, did make it clear that gasoline had to be used. And lest anyone have a problem with that, we're referring to Gatis throughout this document. The YouTuber who is the ex of Diane, who wanted her dead and had a child with her, that would be who they're referring to, and it's perfectly okay to infer that here. The client, Gatis, had his son and daughter in his power so that I would carry out the attack. But why were you so afraid, and did you immediately do what was asked of you, one of the judges wants to know. At first I found it very unreal, but there were threats that he would do something to my children. I tried to find a way out, but it only got worse. He would find out if I talked about it, and I was not allowed to go to the police. Not allowed, as though there was someone holding him somewhere or something. Not quite how it went. Anyway, that's number 6. So we're on 7, and 7 is actually 11 here. So we'll go to 11. See if that's 11. There's 13 pages, so I need to make sure that's 11 over here. Okay. Okay, question from one of the judges. You didn't want to endanger your children, but what about your stepdaughter? I only involved her because the client wanted me to. I tried to keep her as far away as possible. But your stepdaughter lit the Molotov cocktails in January, didn't she? That's right. I was holding the Molotov cocktails. There was a piece of cloth sticking out and she lit it. Abdullah confesses to having lied to his stepdaughter. She didn't know about the threats, supposedly, because he told her they would get money for the attacks. Her brother and sister were threatened and she wasn't. Now, they have to do this because she didn't mention that her brother and sister were threatened, because they probably weren't, during her trial. Anyway, her brother and sister were threatened, she wasn't. How did Abdullah know she would keep her mouth shut, they ask. I lied to her and said we really needed the money. I didn't say anything about the danger to her brother and sister, because then she would panic and do exactly what the client didn't want. When you see his financial circumstances briefly touched on later on, you can see that the motive here most likely was just money, and that both of them knew that. And he didn't tell her anything about that, probably because it didn't happen. 240. The victim abuses her child. He told his stepdaughter that the victim was a bad person who abused her child, and she wasn't allowed to talk about anything either. She was with me, didn't know everything about the case, and I didn't expect her to go to the police. The client put a lot of pressure on me. I didn't have time to think about it very well. You had a lot of time to think about it very well, but I don't doubt that he told that lie, and that's going to be your excuse to pump yourself up to be able to do this to someone. But notice that if you're worried about someone abusing a child, you were about to blow that child up and have him burn alive. And so I find that motive super questionable too. Okay, at 242, what was his wife's role? This is very interesting and important. Did she also give Abdullah orders? The court is asking him this. No, she did not exert any direct pressure. She did put some emphasis because she knew a thing or two from the client, but she didn't know all the details. Now that's interesting verbiage, and I don't know why there wasn't a whole lot more pushback here, but just from this alone, you know that they're asking that question, and he's trying to make it look like she didn't give direct orders, but they are having to admit that she did put some emphasis, whatever that means, and knew a thing or two from Gatis Lagstons. So she was involved in this, basically, is what we know here. She was saying things to him about this, whatever put some emphasis means. And, so you can try to absolve her of knowing everything if you want to, but she was involved and knew some things and was involved in saying things to you. And the part about giving orders is interesting because that's coming up where there may be some evidence for that as well. So an apt conversation is mentioned. It would become clear from this that his wife would have given him orders. Now read that again. It would become clear from this that his wife would have given him orders. So they have an app with her in it giving him orders. Please pay attention to that next time the she's not involved crap gets started. The stepdaughter was also in the app group. It doesn't have to have been my wife. It could also have been the client. So the only out they have for that is to claim that Gatis Lagstons might have used his wife's account in an app to write things to him, but it was his wife in an app, her account rather, writing to him. So, you could logically presume that it was her writing it. Okay, so that's page 7. So we're on page 8, and that's actually on page 5. Okay. So at 246, in the app conversation, Abdullah seems to contradict the client. but he was terrified of it, wasn't he? So by the way, notice this, that the client, he was contradicting him. So Gatis had his own account in the app to write on. So there would be really no reason for him to do that. They were just all simply writing on the app, stupidly. Anyway, back to, but he was terrified of it, wasn't he? How is that? So, yeah, they're asking, how are you so terrified of this guy, but you're actually contradicting him here, not like someone who's afraid to do so. So Abdullah reacts a bit confused. He no longer remembers exactly which conversation this is about. How convenient. I contradicted him because I didn't have the money to buy another phone, as was said. I was dependent on benefits and my parents. I had my own phone, but had to arrange a second phone. I still don't know why I would have needed it. Okay. So we know here that Gatis is on the app asking him to get a second phone, and he gets pissed off and counters of, why should I have to do that? Which isn't the behavior of someone who's carrying out orders from a mob boss they're terrified of. So he is pushing back, not wanting to have to buy the other phone. And also money as a motive is interesting here, because notice that he was dependent on benefits and his parents. A guy with 3 kids. What a lovely human being contributing so much to Germany. Okay, so the next page, we're on page 9, and that's page 12 on Kiwi. If you hear some weird snapping sounds, my dog is eating in the background here. So at 304, the suspect's background is discussed. He says he has a debt of around 5,000 euros and has become quite depressed from the period in detention. Aww. Abdullah is considering a prison sentence. When released, he wants to be there for his children. I also want to go to therapy and return to normal life. That's how I discussed it with my stepdaughter. So therapy is a good idea, but returning to normal, you weren't normal in the first place, so you might want to figure out how to become normal from the therapist. 306. The relationship with his stepdaughter is good. She traveled to Middleburg on her own and was present in court to support him. I do not see her as my stepdaughter, but my daughter. I also love her as my own daughter. Like, what was the purpose of him saying this crap? First of all, look at this. The stepdaughter is free to come into that country, the one who helped pin Luna down and came there for 3 attacks, who was 15 when doing this stuff, and now she's even older. To me, she was basically grown when she did this, and she's there now, able to be there and move about freely, but the victim, in her home country, can't even safely be there in the courthouse. Isn't that fair, and doesn't that make good sense? And we get to hear him talk about how much he loves her. Not one act that he did indicates any such thing. At 307, it says his wife wrote a letter in which she praised her husband. So that's Primal Belle, Marina Abdullah, still married to this guy, writing this letter. She believed him when he said he was forced to do this by others. Well, they've made it clear earlier that she was complicit in knowing exactly what he was being asked to do. They try to say she didn't have all the details, but yet that she may have actually written things that indicated she was having him carry out orders. So, and also that she put emphasis on something, so she knew what was going on. So she knows who the others would be, which would be Gatis and maybe her. So, yeah. Why wouldn't she believe him? He has a great moral compass and is always there for others, she says. Well, the moral compass may be in your satanic view of things, in opposite land, sure. And then always there for others. You mean others who are going to pay him to unalive a child and a woman. Yeah. At 311, the victim speaks. So isn't that nice? We finally get to hear from the person, one of the 2 victims who all this terrible stuff happened to. The victim was contacted again by telephone, so obviously her connection to speak wasn't even still there, or to hear what was going on. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then she reported and was allowed to read her victim statement. You have ruined my life, Ilyas, she began. That was not necessary. We never had any peace. My son cannot go to school, cannot grow up with friends. We have no income. At 3:14, I'm angry and exhausted at the same time. I don't think there are words that can describe what we've been through. She sobs for a moment. They were laughing when they did this. What was so funny when you're so scared? The burns are 2nd and 3rd degree. I want to emphasize that. The man who threw the acid in my face was clearly aiming it at my face. He nearly beat me to death. I had at least 20 stitches in my head. And then this second part goes with the other page, but I'll go ahead and read it because what she's saying here is that if what they'd done had worked, it would have worked if she hadn't been defending herself so much. But she realized she could die. But I couldn't because I had a child. I begged you to stop. And so that was page 9. going to page 10 is actually going to be page 6 here. Okay, 6. So on page 6 here, we have at 317, the rest of her statement, or part of it. The blows were hateful. How did you get that hatred? If you were supposedly under pressure, you were paid for it. I think that's been confirmed. The lady who was with you knew exactly what she was doing. She played a big part in this too. The two of you tried to injure me and kill me. That might have, and then that's where she was saying that might have worked, except for that she was defending herself pretty vehemently because she knew that if she died, her child wouldn't have anyone. 1520. Other people must be protected from you and the woman who was with you time and again. It was crossing the line with a very clear goal in mind, to set a toddler and his mother on fire to burn them alive. Then the connection is suddenly broken. Isn't that convenient? The connection is broken. So now the victim can't even speak. So the lawyer reads the rest of her statement. So her client's story is complete. Well, you know what? I don't think that feels very complete to somebody who has been made to wait for all this time and can't be there, but Angelina can, and can't even finish reading her statement. The lawyer just reads the rest of it for her. 323. There's a 5-minute pause, after which the public prosecutor's indictment and the plea of the lawyer of Ilyas follows. The hearing is resumed, and they need about 20 minutes for that, and the verdict in the case against the stepdaughter is something they point to, that she was found guilty but got acquitted, and really she was acquitted due to them using her age and using her mental status, which I thought was bullshit. They didn't allude to any particular mental disorder other than ones that indicate she's dangerous, that she has no conscience, and that she'll do whatever's asked of her. But they didn't, give us any particular diagnosis or give her any course of treatment that they thought would be the proper one. And due to not doing that, Luna didn't get compensated. So just remember how they did that. But it says here they're recognizing that she was found guilty and that there was intent to inflict serious bodily harm. But they weren't going to hold her responsible. They're holding her father responsible, stepfather. The attempted arson when the victim and her son were home is mentioned, as is the fire that destroyed the living room 6 days later when the victim and her child weren't home. The suspect confessed to the facts and says he regrets it, but he says he was forced to commit the acts. He himself was threatened, and his ex-wife and children were said to have been in danger. And that takes care of page 10. Okay, so we're on page 11 here, so that's going to actually be page 13. So 1541 or 341. The names of the client, the well-known YouTuber, and the ex-wife of suspect Ilyas are mentioned. So at this point in time, they're mentioning their names, but they're not putting it in this skeleton transcript. But that would be Gatis and Marina Abdullah, or Goatis, Varia, and Primal Belle. The latter is said to have sent messages to Abdullah, so the latter would be Primal Belle. Marina Abdullah is said to have sent messages to Abdullah just before the attack with sulfuric acid. She is said to have known what was going to happen that day, so everybody note that. Another piece of evidence and information pointing to what the courts are saying, and they said it on August 28, 2024. The stepdaughter has stated that she has met the YouTuber, but she doesn't know the role of her mother, she says. So, read that again. Primal Belle sent messages to Ilyas just before the attack with sulfuric acid and is said to have known what was going to happen that day. And they're trying to find an out for that, but everybody was on that app. Gatis had his own account on that app, so if they're referring to that app, she had her own account that she was writing on. Okay. 344. Ilyas A. was threatened. That he was threatened is not evident from sent emails or YouTube videos. So this is all him saying it, but they didn't present any evidence showing it. The investigation does not conclusively show the suspect was forced to perform certain activities, says the officer. Despite the threats mentioned by the suspect, he also started a fire more than 6 months after the acid attack. So as we've been saying, there's all this huge span of time between the different events. There are also indications that Abdullah received money for the attacks. Indications he received money, so a lot of people have been saying things off and on about that, trying to indicate that he wasn't paid for the attacks. So the court seems to think that he was. There are indications he received money for the attacks. And once again, this isn't a complete transcript, but something must have been presented to that effect. But nothing was presented conclusively showing he was threatened. So note that. 346. The suspect has committed 3 very serious attacks. There's no evidence that the suspect tried to get out of the situation. He planned, prepared, and carried out the attacks. He could have acted differently, and that could be reasonably expected of him. 348. The suspect could have gone to the police. There's no evidence he investigated legal options to bring the wife and children to safety. There was an alternative to his actions, and the officer can also conclude his actions were disproportionate. 350. The suspect is fully criminally liable for the criminal acts he committed. He committed an extremely serious attack on the victim using sulfuric acid. The attack was premeditated and had to cause serious bodily injury. When the woman came outside that evening, they seized their chance. She was beaten and doused with acid. The consequences for the victim are very serious and long-lasting. The injuries, visible in the photos, speaks volumes. In January, the suspect traveled to Berghamsted twice again to the house of a traumatized woman. The job had to be finished. He accepted he could also kill the victim's child. A few days later, he did try, and the suspect and her child were just lucky that they weren't home. Yep, all of that is true. Okay, so page 7 is actually page 12, and we'll go to that one next. At 355. So Ilyas is legally held accountable for dragging his stepdaughter along. The housing association no longer wants to rent a house to the victim because they're afraid of another attack. She moves from hotel to hotel and still fears her ex. If the Public Prosecution Service has the opportunity, we will proceed to arrest the other persons involved. Okay, so, and you know what's funny is just noticing that the housing association thing, you know, that's kind of housing discrimination, at least in this country, but at the same time I can certainly understand why people wouldn't want to put all these other families at risk, because every single person in that row of houses could have been murdered, and that's outrageous. And this would be affordable housing for Luna and her son that they now aren't receiving. And then these people you'll see later want to balk at paying her. Again, 358. Expressing regret afterwards is too late, says the public prosecutor. He comes to the demand, meaning he comes to the demand to do these acts. The attack with the sulfuric acid carries a prison sentence of more than 5 years. Because it was premeditated, it must be more than those 5. The attempted arson carries a prison sentence of 20 months, and the actual arson carries a prison sentence of 3 to 4 years. So they come up here with a demand for a 12-year prison sentence for him. And that would include taking away the time he spent in pretrial detention, which is about 2 years. So we're talking about 10 years. Okay, well, that's better than nothing, but that's not good enough. And there is a range of what they could have done here. And I definitely think they could have gone for more. There have been 18 and even 20-something year sentences for acid attacks in the Netherlands. And look at what all this one involved. So they're just really going for the minimum here. In addition, there should be a contact ban with the victim and her child. Well, no kidding. But the way this has gone on, wouldn't be surprised if they didn't order her to have tea and crumpets with them. 1605. So we're at 4 o'clock now, 4:05. The floor is given to Roland Ertz, the lawyer for Ilyas. He starts his plea with the personal circumstances of his client, who was born in Pristina. The family moved to Germany in the late 90s during the Kosovo War. Ertz talks about his client's studies, meeting with his wife, and working life. Yeah, we really need to get to know this fellow, and so what? A lot of people have things that they've gone through and they've been displaced. Doesn't have anything to do with this. Ertz then tells things his client has already told about the YouTuber, the wife of Ilyas, the attacks on the woman, and later her home. He also quotes the victim, who points to her ex, the YouTuber. He is mentally disturbed, she stated about her ex, who came from Latvia. Another woman is said to have stated that the Latvian YouTuber said he wanted to kill his ex. So yeah, he's from Latvia. Wow, we know who we're talking about here, don't we? And that other woman would probably be Catherine, stating that he said he wanted to kill his ex, or Luna, Diane. So yeah, and I think that might be him trying to make it look like that because Gatis is disturbed. Ilyas might have legitimately been afraid of him or under duress or whatever, but sometimes disturbed people seek out other disturbed people, and I agree with some other assessments that are made here later on. And so we're on the last page, page 13, which is actually page 1 of what they uploaded on Kiwi. So 1618 or 418. According to him, Ert's client suffered from real psychological force majeure. That is why, in his opinion, his client should be discharged from prosecution. The victim's last medical information dates back to a year ago. We have to guess what the situation is now, says Ertz. Wowee, so, okay, I don't know if I pronounced that French word correctly, but real psychological force majeure. So poor little Ilyas, his tiny little brain, was so disturbed and he was under so much trauma and duress that he couldn't think at all. So month after month after month after month of doing whatever was asked of him and going on with his life, not approaching anyone for help, was due to just being so disturbed and crazy because of Gatis. So he should be discharged altogether from prosecution. He just had no clue what he was doing. And the victim's last medical information dates back to a year ago. So yeah, if you're an indigent person, for instance, in this country, and you are almost dead, and you go to a hospital or an ER in that condition, they're only obligated to save your life. They can be in trouble if they don't at least try to stabilize or save you, but they don't have to go further than that. A lot of things would be on you. So getting compensation for somebody harming you is what people usually would want to try and do. So her last medical information dating back to a year ago would probably be the life-saving intervention type of stuff, like her nose so she can breathe, because more of the acid went in her nose trying to keep it out of her eyes. And her nose was broken at the time, so you can imagine the damage that was done there and what it would take to correct that. And, opening up someone's head by beating on it until they need 20 stitches, breaking bones, almost losing an arm, third-degree burns all over you. A lot of that medical stuff she had to have done would really be like repeated visits just to keep from dying. You could get infections from all of that, and you could die. So, and I don't know that her last medical information dates back to a year ago, but I don't think there's any guessing. There could be something presented of exactly what she would need, and it could be a lot more than what she's asking for. So that is just absolutely disgraceful and absurd. 424. According to lawyer Ertz, compensation for non-material damage of 45,000 euros is insufficiently substantiated. The victim stayed in hotels when she was in hiding. The lawyer finds it strange she was on the run and wanted to remain anonymous, but did post content on her YouTube channel, just like the places where she stayed, where he lists a series of hotels at home and abroad. Okay, so non-material damage of 45,000 euros. Does anybody think about what the cost of living anywhere is year after year? So 2 years of running around being in hiding, and she was having to stay in women's shelters and things before that, even when she had a home, because these people wouldn't leave her alone. Now she's been almost murdered with 3 different attacks. So they're running around, and you can't really work when you're in hiding properly, so you're having to spend much more money to live the way she's having to live also. He thinks that's too much for that many years of that, and then no telling how many future years of that. Then he tries to actually cast aspersion on her with this extra comment about her posting on YouTube, as though he thinks it's strange she was in hiding but did that. Like, is he suggesting she's not really hiding from these people? On her YouTube channel, first of all, she got completely offline before she was attacked, trying to prevent being attacked because they wanted her to be quiet and not have a presence on social media, and she complied with that, and she got attacked. So much later on, she went ahead and started telling her story, and started very small, much smaller, less information videos. You could even indicate, a lot of fear in even doing that. And now she's building in her confidence and talking more, and she knows she has support. So that's what's going on her YouTube channel. She wasn't giving like a map to where she's staying or anything. Duh. And also, the victimizers are on YouTube raising funds for crime. So while they're doing that and they're wanted, it might help if she does something to counter that, which is what she's doing. So that's also just absolutely sickening. 427. Victim's lawyer Sandra Van Steenberg makes it clear that no amount does justice to her client's suffering. But an amount must be awarded, she says. It's up to the court to determine that amount. The reason her client stayed in different places was to avoid being found. The housing association no longer wanted to rent her a home, fearing new assessments. That means my client and her child have lost their safe haven forever. Now, while that's a decent bunch of, sentences to string together to make a fairly decent statement, I don't think it's nearly strong enough, and I don't know if more was said, but, you could have plenty here indicating an amount, I think, that would go beyond that, but, avoiding being found, yeah, no kidding, and, these people anybody that would rent her a home would have to know about the danger, and it's just absolutely outrageous to have to even defend that that's a problem for her and that she's entitled to compensation. 431, the suspect has the last word. Isn't that nice? So Luna's not even there, and she's barely even there in electronic form, but the suspect has the last word in her home country. And he wants to use it. He says, among other things, I myself was dealing with problems when I ended up in this nightmare. I was scared to death, not for myself, but for my children. What bullshit is that already? So a lot of people have problems, and you didn't just end up in the nightmare. You kind of participated in being in it and creating it for other people and for yourself now. You weren't scared to death. Your behavior doesn't indicate that, including when you were laughing when you were committing the attack. And in terms of not being scared for yourself but for children, you put your stepdaughter in the position of doing that with you, and you took your children over there to hang out with those people, so I don't think that you were scared for your children. I want to apologize to the victim once again. So yeah, you've apologized to her once before, so I guess once again ought to do it right. 2 I'm sorries, and we're done with this. What this woman has been through is a horror that no one wants to experience. Yeah, we know. Thanks for telling us, Captain Obvious. I hope she recovers and can forgive me one day. Yeah, 'cause that's what's important here. Thank you. You're welcome. And the verdict for this mess will be on Wednesday, the 11th of September, 9/11. The hearing has ended. Wow. Well, so that's disappointing to think about him getting a 12-year sentence, 2 served, 10 years. But I do hope at least that that's what happens. And it is disgusting that they won't tell us more about what they're doing to find the other 2, but it does indicate that they would arrest them. The way they phrase that is if the opportunity presents itself or something to that effect. So if they have the ability, they could be actively taking steps. They don't say whether they are or not, but let's hope that they are, and pressure can still keep on being applied to them on that front, and also towards shutting down their ability to raise funds on social media. The information from this hearing should nothing but help with doing that. It's just an absolutely disgusting and unreal situation. It's almost comedic that you have 2 lunatics who are actually trying to sue their victim while simultaneously being so overly tiptoed around and treated with respect with regard to not even mentioning their name in this skeleton transcript. Meanwhile, the victim is barely able to keep a phone connection to hear what's even happening that will affect her a lot. So even though this is all disgusting, also take into account that if Gatis and Marina, if and when they're caught and they, face the music and they are sentenced, let's say it would only be to 10 years like Ilyas, at least that's a decade of peace for that little boy and for his daughter not to grow up possibly being harmed, since he's indicating he thinks incest is all right. And let's also reiterate, it's not defamation to talk about the truth about someone in Europe. So he makes those videos, and a lot of people believe he's the sock puppet making those comments. So regardless, we have the videos of him discussing that, and his even on the Goatis channel, the commentary about 1 to 2-year-old children. So that little girl wouldn't have to be around that for 10 years maybe, and that little boy could grow up for 10 years in peace, and Luna could have 10 years at least of peace. That's something. So none of this is right, but it is something. So hopefully on September the 11th, the something will be a guilty verdict with a maximum sentence, but I am combo disgusted, but also the parts of this that help us to know certain things and know that the court knows certain things, that's good and that's important for getting them off social media and helping people have a vested interest in getting them caught and not just forgetting about it. Alrighty, thank you.